Okay, got it. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Pasadena, and this long-awaited informational piece on the technology that we now have in Pasadena, which is Shotspotter. A couple of years now, and it's just a conversation started to really for more of our community and more of people to really understand what ShotSpotter is. And we're so blessed and happy today to have four wonderful experts. And I'm not going to, give full titles. They'll introduce themselves and do everything as well. But we're so blessed to have people from around the country, from Portland, Chicago, Oakland, and ourselves, Pasadena. So I ask you all to popcorn, and let's start off with Oakland. And you can popcorn it to whoever you choose.
Thank you, Florence. Oakland gets to go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Rosenberg. I'm the Advocacy Director at Oakland Privacy. Despite the name, we are a regional privacy group that covers most of Northern California, but we did start out in Oakland, where we created the first Municipal Citizens Advisory Commission on privacy. And Oakland has had a ShotSpotter contract off and on, and there's a story there, since 2014, and was actually one of the early adopters of the technology. And I guess I will pass it on to Jay.
Knew you were going to pass it to me. I was reading your mind.
I'm Jay.
Aje Amaechi, she, they pronouns. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I am the Reimagining Community Safety Manager for Unite Oregon, basically thinking about public safety and violence is like a public health issue, and thinking of public safety like outside of kind of the carceral understanding of just locking people up to solve social problems. I'm also an organizer with Freedom to Thrive, which is another organization that focuses on reimagining safety and thinking of safety as investment in the community and in the planet, and divesting from systems of harm like the prison industrial complex. And I'm proud to say that we do not have ShotSpotter, but we were very close to having it. We were told that it was definitely going to happen, and we stopped it anyway. So proud of that, and happy to say that temporarily, at least, it's not here, but I know they're going to try again. I know for a fact. So stay tuned, I guess. And I will pass it to Ed.
Thanks, Jay. Hey, everyone. My name is Ed Vogel. Use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of Lucy Parsons Labs out of Chicago. And Chicago, like Oakland, has had a long history with ShotSpotter. Pilot in 2003 that was discontinued shortly, pilot in 2007 that was also discontinued, but the city has now had a continuous contract since 2012. And then just recent years, it's grown substantially in terms of coverage area across the city. So we'll be talking more about that, but I'll pass it over to Mo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Tasajar. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based in Pasadena. I work as a senior staff attorney at the ACLU Southern California. So I'll be providing some information about the Pasadena piece and hoping to learn from my comrades in Oakland and Oregon and Chicago about their experiences. Just in terms of Pasadena, we've had ShotSpotter for about a year and a half. So it started in February 2022. So it was a 3-year pilot. So we're relatively new to the ShotSpotter world compared to you all. So we've got some data which we'll talk about, but hoping to lean on other collective wisdom in this space. So thank you.
Thank you all. So let's just get straight into the first questions. What were the circumstances or rationale given for installing ShotSpotter, and would like Portland, Oakland, and Chicago to answer?
I can go first. So there's a big context that I don't want to go too much into because I could wax poetry about this all day, but I'm sure there's something that is probably familiar in everybody here's city, which is there's been a big backlash to the racial justice uprisings that have been happening when people were demanding accountability for police violence and police murder of Black community members. And so in Portland, there's all these famous pictures. There's tens of thousands of people were in the street every night for months. And the result of that, we got our first civilian community board. We decriminalized all drugs in Oregon. All of these huge, huge things came out of that because the people as a mass decided the way we're being policed is unacceptable. Of course, the police could not have that. They could not have this huge societal change, throughout history. I mean, since the Reconstruction era, really, police have always responded to racial justice movements and all sorts of social justice movements in this kind of reactionary way where they're like, law and order, law and order. So I'm sure every city is kind of going through this right now. It seems like it's a common thing happening all over the country. It's definitely happening in Portland, the big law and order push. And so, that is kind of the setting around this is proposed. So violence in Portland has the numbers themselves in terms of the amount of violence, the amount of homicides has remained exactly the same, but the weapons that are used have changed. So there's more gun violence versus there used to be more stabbings. And so they're using that those changes in the numbers to really talk about there's this huge increase in gun violence and Portland is out of control. It's completely, it's very interesting too, because I meet people all the time that have never been to Portland that tell me oh, is it still smoldering ashes? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was never smoldering ashes. There was never any of the things that they saw on Fox News. It was never like that. There was maybe the protests, first of all, where it was getting tear gas and stuff like that was a very small radius. And there was not the kind of things that people really saw. But our media and our police force are portraying this message out to the world that Portland is this lawless chaos, gun violence in the streets, all this kind of stuff. So because of this slight uptick in gun violence, they established a task force, the Focus Intervention Team. And the Focus Intervention Team, the history of that is it's actually the third iteration of two other task forces that have been disbanded because of racism. So the first one, I think it was called the Gun Violence Task Force, and it was disbanded because they pretty much were only arresting, pretty much Black people, and it was pretty obvious what they were doing. So that was disbanded due to racism, and they openly apologized and everything. It was a common understood thing, And then they reformed as a new organization, which of course I'm blanking on the name, and again disband for racism. So they formed again as the Focus Intervention Team, but this time they were like, we'll attach a community oversight group to it. And so if we attach the oversight group to it, they'll make sure that they're not racist this time. Of course, the oversight group is all their, pretty much people that are very much in line with them. And those meetings, which I've attended pretty much almost all of them, while this was happening, they were very friendly meetings. They opened up with 30 minutes of police propaganda where officers got center stage to talk about how their week was. And they were like, and there was this many murders and we saw this many things. And that's how every meeting opened up. So as you can see, there wasn't much oversight going on. So that group, the Focus Intervention Team, Community Oversight Group, FITCOG for short, they came up with a report that talked about, the gun violence epidemic, and the solution for that was Shotspotter. Shotspotter and a database, a gang violence database, which, by the way, has already been thrown out of Portland because it's racist. That's pretty common knowledge that gang violence databases are pretty racist, how they determine who's in a gang. They're just looking at Black people and brown people congregating and saying, oh, they're in a gang, and then putting them on a list and then surveilling them. So, so many human rights violations. They tried to do it in the past, again, stopped because it was racism. And so they create this report that advocates for the return of a gang violence list and the use of in conjunction with the use of Shotspotter. And the report was, you can read it yourself, if you Google FitCog report, and it's pretty much it's a Shotspotter marketing tract. Most of the things are easily refutable, including where they said that they met with the ACLU, and the ACLU said there was no privacy problems, which I called the ACLU and they were like, we never said that. We've never spoken to them. I don't know why they put that in there. Like, so they're just, anyway, so that's kind of the context of how it got proposed. And yeah, I've talked long enough, so I'll pass it to someone else.
Well, I can jump in quickly just to say with regards to Oakland. I mean, obviously, if you know anything about Oakland, there is legitimately a gun violence problem, but maybe even more so, there's a consciousness or a complex about the gun violence problem in Oakland. So when ShotSpotter first came along, I think the rationale was pretty simple. It was, this software will help us to identify where the guns are and to take them off the street. 10 years later, we've been using it, there's still as many guns on the street or more. So the rationale was kind of shifted. And the rationale I've most recently heard, which is completely different than what was being said 10 years ago, is that ShotSpotter allows the police to find people who have been shot and get them to the hospital if people don't call and announce that someone has been shot. So it's kind of like a victim finder service or a victim finder alert button. So that's been sort of the rationale the last couple of years. And I think that it's helpful to note that it really changed from the beginning to the end over this 10-year cycle.
I can jump in about Chicago. So similar to Oakland, concern about gun violence, real problems with gun violence in Chicago. But I think what was interesting in terms of ShotSpotter's the increased coverage area in Chicago was right around kind of 2016 or so. ShotSpotter became essential to the Chicago Police Department surveillance apparatus. So it was used within one of the strategic decision support centers, which is sort of like a little kind of fusion center, police intelligence hub that are located in each police district. So they use ShotSpotter as the main sort of infrastructure to alert the other surveillance. So the cameras, license plate readers, it became the first touch. And it then also led to significant police, presence in the communities where it was, mostly or exclusively Black and brown communities. And then when in 2018, when then Mayor Rahm Emanuel expanded the city's contract from roughly 13.5 square miles of coverage area to more than 100 square miles of coverage area, it became one of the essential tools within this whole surveillance apparatus. And I say that to say that I think it's important to note that adopting a technology like ShotSpotter is really it's going to be seen as one piece in a larger surveillance apparatus. So this won't be the only surveillance technology that the police will want to get in Pasadena. And there will be, seeking other additional technologies that complement it and really build out a much stronger and more menacing surveillance presence in the city.
Sheesh. Thank you. In your respective cities, there have been studies, audits, or reports done about ShotSpotter's efficiency. If so, what were the findings? Chicago and Pasadena, please answer.
Yeah, Ed, do you want to go first on that?
Sure. So I can talk about two studies out of Chicago that are notable. The first one was conducted by a group called the MacArthur Justice Center. And what they found, throw the study in the chat. They found that they looked at ShotSpotter initiated police deployments over 18 months. And they found that roughly 90% of the time when police were deployed on ShotSpotter initiated deployments, there was no evidence of a gun crime. 90% of the time, no evidence of a gun crime. This was roughly 61 unfounded ShotSpotter initiated police deployments a day. More than 40,000 over those, 21 and a half months. The Office of Inspector General in Chicago, sort of the independent body that does a lot of this kind of research for the city, they, after MacArthur Justice put their report out, they conducted the same analysis to corroborate it, to confirm it. And they actually found that it was 91%. So that they found that it was higher than what the MacArthur Justice Center said. But the other interesting thing that they found that's notable is they found a high correlation between ShotSpotter deployments and the use of stop and frisk. So they found instances of roughly 2,400 cases of stop and frisk on those deployments. So I think the big thing to note is, in terms of efficacy, ShotSpotter is just collecting all sounds. The way they're, I'm sure Mohammed could speak more intelligently, eloquently about this than I can, but the way in which their review process operates, they're more or less just sending police out on anything that sounds like a gunshot. Their policy is rather sort of be safe rather than sorry in terms of that. So and these two pieces have been really instrumental for us in being able to initiate a conversation around what actually is safety, because the surveillance clearly isn't working. The efficacy of the technology is not there. So, surveillance isn't safety, but what is? So these are two important studies. I think, the host put the OIGs in there as well. Happy to talk more about those if there are other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Unfortunately, it seems like that same what Pasadena's experience thus far is going to track Chicago's, which is a shame, because when Pasadena's deployment was mulled, everybody in Pasadena, tons and tons of community folks came out and said, look, why are we doing this? We have great examples of how ShotSpotter is ineffective. It's a waste. It doesn't do what you say it's going to do. Look at Chicago. Look at these studies. Look at the OIG report. And the response that we got in Pasadena was, oh, Chicago's different. Chicago's like literally full of crime. There are people just shooting everybody in Chicago. It's like, Pasadena's a tiny little quaint, twee town. We have the Rose Bowl, like you have the Rose Parade. It's not, but what I'm about to show you is that it's not, in fact, it came to pass. It has come to pass. It is exactly, if not exactly, it's close to what's going on in Chicago. So what I might do is real quickly just share some of that data, because I do think that data is important from Pasadena. So real quick, this is, I'm sharing, if you can see that, some data that we just got not long ago, a couple months back from Pasadena. So granted, this is data that includes about a year and a quarter, of data from Pasadena. So here's what they gave us. This is presented by the Pasadena Police Department to a city council committee. And I want to walk through it a little bit because I think it's really, really important. I won't take too much of your time, but it's going to involve some numbers. So bear with me, right? This is what they gave us, right? They tell us those, they give us a bunch of information, a whole bunch of alerts in 2022, a whole bunch of alerts in 2023. And we only got so many 911 calls, and there are a whole bunch of shootings that were unreported. So let's unpack it here, okay? So we've got, in 2022, there was 109 alerts. And in the first quarter of 2023, there were 80 alerts, right? These are ShotSpotter alerts. So ShotSpotter says a gun went off, all right? So 189 total alerts, okay? Then what does a police department say? We've received only 42 correlating 911 calls, right? What does that mean? 42 correlating 911 calls. That means there was 189 shootings, according to the cops, but only 42 people called 911. So ShotSpotter is working, right? That's the suggestion. ShotSpotter is picking up gunfire that 911 calls isn't, right? And how much of that? Well, 42%, the 42 is 22% of the time we get 911 calls. So there's 78% of shootings that were unreported, right? All the other ones were ShotSpotter alerts. They're shootings that went unreported, right? Because no one called 911, but ShotSpotter caught them, right? But then the question is, well, all of the other alerts, were they in fact shootings, right? That's my question. The cops said they were shootings. But then if you look literally in the very next sentence, they say, when an alert is received, if officers are unable to locate evidence, it is difficult to determine if it was an actual shooting. So they literally say in the very next sentence, that actually, we don't really know if that 78% were shootings at all. Like, we don't know if they're fireworks. We don't know if like somebody ran over a cat. We have no idea. Right. So, and on the one hand, they were like, look, 78% of shootings were unreported by 911. And so ShotSpotter works. On the other hand, they're like, wait a minute, but of those 78%, we actually have no idea. Like, we don't know. Well, were they shootings? Who knows? Right. But there's more, so that's not the only thing they said. Right. They give us the thing that they always do, which is look at all the highlights. Like, look at all the stuff that they did. Like ShotSpotter, look at in February, it did this thing. And in October, it did that thing. Right. They showed 6 of these examples. The problem is they don't tell us if these examples, if ShotSpotter was necessary for those examples. We don't know. Right. If in the absence of ShotSpotter, would like the cops have done something? Who knows? It's not clear. Right. And more importantly, they don't tell us about the times in which ShotSpotter didn't do anything, right? So look at this. Here's an example. This is from October 30th. There was a victim identified in a fatal shooting in Pasadena. Somebody was literally found dead from a gunshot. And in that article, it says the police department spokesperson said, ShotSpotter gunfire detection system did not hear and report gunfire. Right. So in this incident, somebody died, but ShotSpotter didn't pick it up. Right. There's lots of examples of this. This is another one. Right. The idea is, look, ShotSpotter there are a bunch of cases where ShotSpotter doesn't even do the thing that the cops say it does. Right. Well, so then you might respond, OK, well, does that mean we should get more like ShotSpotters? We should get more cameras. Well, if we look more closely at the data, I will convince you that I don't think we should, because of the same things that Ed was talking about in Chicago. Right. Here's some more granular data. We're going to focus on one line in there. I'll blow it up for you. That particular line says the percentage of all incidents in which no gun casings were found, but an alert went off. Right. So there was no evidence of a gun being shot. That last line is the total. The last column is a total column, 76%. That means in 76% of ShotSpotter alerts, there was no evidence found that there was a shooting or there was a gun at all, right? And in fact, it talks about there in only in 22% of the cases, that's the bottom right corner, was there ever a police report taken at all. Right. In the majority of them, 78%, there weren't any police reports because the cops didn't think there was anything that went down. Right. That's not quite 90 like in Chicago, but it's close. So then you might ask, OK, well, what about arrests? What about convictions in Pasadena? From that same time, they told us there have been 2 arrests that came about as a result of ShotSpotter, and there have been 0 convictions. Right. Even if you agree that ShotSpotter is a good thing, the question is it effective? And the answer is no. That is even if you agree that ShotSpotter is a good thing. But I don't think we could talk about this, but I think it's decidedly not. So I think the experience in Pasadena is like the experience in Chicago, which is that cops are being sent to all of these different alerts. In fact, in Pasadena, just like in other places, they prioritize ShotSpotter alerts at the expense of other things. So if there's a ShotSpotter alert, the cops go in and they go in hot. And when they go in hot, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, nothing has happened, right? And that's what we're spending money on in Pasadena. So there you go.
And I will just share that we have now 4 years of annual spot shotter reports in Oakland as a result of our privacy commission. And all 3 years, the number of ShotSpotter alerts that do not result in police reports has been over 3/4. And I think this past year, it was exactly 76%.
Wow.
Just like Pasadena.
Wow. What if...
Maybe that's the California number. I don't know.
What, if any, disparate impact does ShotSpotter have on minority communities in particular? Who, Jesus. Portland, Oakland, and Chicago.
Well, I can jump in if nobody else wants to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to start from the sort of obvious thing, at least in Oakland, where is it put? It's put in minority communities. That's one thing. And in Oakland, we have a really stark example of that. They're all in what we call the flatlands of Oakland, which are the poorer and more low-income communities. We have a freeway that sort of divides one area from the others, and literally all the shot spotters are on one side of the freeway. So that's the first thing. In addition, Mo talked about the cops coming in hot, and we've sort of seen that in other situations. I think Adam Toledo, the 12-year-old in Chicago who was killed as a result of a ShotSpotter alert, it's like a really good example of that. It was the middle of the night. There was a ShotSpotter alert. Cops came in. They were ready for trouble. They found a 12-year-old kid. And you would think that would cause a de-escalation, but it didn't, because the ShotSpotter kind of set the tone that there was violence on the street. And so they were going to see that no matter what was actually out there, which was a kid. One of the things that kind of activated me around ShotSpotter, and I'll take the opportunity to mention it here, is that, and it's been fairly widely reported in Vice and a couple of others, from time to time, ShotSpotter has been known to sort of change their description of what their microphones heard based on what fits most neatly with a law enforcement narrative about what happened. And this is often in the case of homicides, and it's often, especially in the case of police shootings, because that's when the police would have a really strong opinion about what happened. And in fact, ShotSpotter's owner, Ralph Clark, has sort of said that, yeah, that's our company policy. We really try to accommodate our customers. We trust them, we believe them. And for those of us who have sometimes seen that the narrative regarding police shootings is not exactly what appears on the body camera or what comes out later or what appears on the cell phone or whatever, that often seems like, at best, credulous, and at worst, complicity with framing people for crimes that they didn't commit. And this is not hypothetical. There are at least 2 cases that we know about. I'll just briefly touch on them. Michael Williams in Chicago, we had a ShotSpotter alert that was literally moved, I think, about 0.8 of a mile from where it actually was recorded. That was a shooting inside of a car, so it was a little unclear, but certainly the physical evidence that the microphone had was kind of altered in order to fulfill a narrative that Michael Williams had shot someone that he did not shoot, and he spent time in jail as a result. And a couple of years earlier, and I wrote an article about this, it's called Find Us a Fifth Shot. It's on Medium, and I'll try to stick it in the chat. A 35-year-old air conditioner repairman named Sylvan Simmons spent 14 months in jail, was accused of 4 felonies. He was acquitted on all charges, but what happened is he was shot by the police 4 times. There was a ShotSpotter alert. This was in the city of Rochester, and the police decided that the narrative was that Simmons had tried to shoot them, although there was no evidence of such. So a gun miraculously appeared, and the Rochester police involved asked ShotSpotter to review their recording of 4 shots and see if they could find a 5th shot. This was because 4 bullet casings had been found inside of Mr. Simmons's body. So if he had in fact shot the police officer first, there would have to be a 5th shot, which there wasn't. ShotSpotter did claim that they found that shot. They put a forensic audit into court saying so, even though they had originally said only 4 shots. And fortunately, a judge threw it out, and Simmons was acquitted. But by that time, in addition to being shot 4 times by the cops, he had spent 16 months incarcerated, first in the hospital and then in jail. And of course, the terror of being charged with 4 felonies, none of which you committed. And so you have a situation here where a surveillance vendor, sometimes by sort of being complicit with what law enforcement wants, can literally put people into mortal danger. Potentially life in prison for a crime that they did not commit. And that's a big problem. And because of the ways in which police interact with Black and brown people, it is Black and brown people that are in the forefront of the situations when that is most likely to happen. And if it happened twice that we know about, there may be other times that we don't know about. Sorry, that was a long story, but I thought it was important to answer the question.
Yeah, I can jump in and to continue talking about Chicago. So yeah, when Adam Toledo was murdered in March of 2021, that galvanized the city, and it's when we launched our campaign to cancel the city's contract. And as Tracy said, what happened during that night, the police came in hot. And this is, I think, what happens every time there is a deployment. The expectation is that there is going to be a firefight. So the cops come in, their weapons are drawn, they fly into a situation, and it leads to more violence, really. And any instance the way in which Shotspotter increases the contact between police and Black and brown communities, Black and brown folks, that is only going to lead to more violence, as we know. In Chicago, as it was said, as well as Tracy said in Oakland, Chicago is Shotspotter microphones are only installed in the majority Black and brown police districts. In the 12 police districts that are majority Black and brown, it roughly covers 80% of the Black community in the city and maybe 60% of the Latinx community. And then in terms of other instances of disparate impact, already mentioned stop and frisk that the OIG found. Tracy also talked about Mr. Williams. So Mr. Williams, during it was the sort of the start of the uprisings in 2020. He was driving one night, and that's when he was flagged by someone he knew. Gentleman got in the car, and this led to what ultimately led to Mr. Williams spending 11 months in Cook County Jail during the height of the COVID pandemic. A Black man in his 60s. He contracted COVID twice, only to have the state's attorney's office drop the charges when they learned that the Chicago Police Department had asked ShotSpotter to change the location of the alert, as Tracy referenced, which is something that police commonly do. ShotSpotter changes the location of alerts after they've been recorded, and they will do this at the request of police. I think so I'll add the link that I put in earlier around the npolicesurveillance.com. You can see the Chicago map in there, and where the microphones are installed, where they're concentrated. I think the other thing to note is that Chicago, as is the case across the country, ShotSpotter alerts are given the highest priority. So that means that in terms of disparate impact, again, that the police presence in these communities, it just blankets these communities. And it gives the justification. It's a probable cause generator. So it gives the justification to go in and to arrest folks and to stop folks. I'm trying to find the article, but there was recently an article where a couple of Chicago police officers were found collecting guns at different stop and frisk opportunities, and then we're turning them in on ShotSpotter deployments because there is an unspoken bounty for collecting guns in the police department. So just further leading to more corruption and use of ShotSpotter deployments for more corruption in the department. So I could go on and on. I will end it at that.
I feel like everyone has touched on a lot of what I would touch on with the cops coming hot and that sort of thing. The only thing that I will add is I'm not sure exactly where the funding for, ShotSpotter is coming from in the other cities, but in Portland, it was proposed to come from the Office of Violence Prevention, which the Office of Violence Prevention traditionally funds things like youth mentorship programs and community engagement opportunities, community beautification projects, things like public health approaches to actually solving violence, things that we actually know work, that like the science supports work, and are actually pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. Like planting trees in neighborhoods with high levels of gun violence affects the gun violence, and it's a lot cheaper than putting a lot of police in there. So the idea that like potentially millions of dollars would be taken from the office that is really one of the few offices that is designed to focus on Black and brown communities and the violence that afflicts a lot of those communities in Portland, like that for me was one of the most egregious parts, knowing that this this branch of government, or not branch government, but this agency normally does fund things like mentorship and coaching and like all these different amazing programs that actually do affect violence. So the idea of divesting from that to invest in this like, you know, faulty technology, it's just, it's mind-boggling. It's beyond, you know, thought. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Knock LA recently reported that in Pasadena, Shotspotter will cost $630,000 for the first 3 years. What are your thoughts on the cost of using this tech, and is it sustainable in the long run? Chicago and Pasadena.
Maybe I could take this maybe, and then Ed, you can jump in. Just from my perspective, I'll be clear, right? So in Pasadena, the contract is, or the project is going to cost $630,000, right? So the question is that you know, is it sustainable to spend that much money? And here's my answer. My answer is costs for policing are never, like, spending money on police is never sustainable. It's just not a sustainable enterprise, because policing itself inherently is unsustainable. It's not like a sustainable, life-affirming system. It's not a system designed to invest in communities, to like reap rewards. It's not a system that's designed to, like, you know, you put in money and then you get like the fruits of your labor, like in the future. That's not what policing is. Policing is a reactive, sort of reactionary enterprise. It's designed to punish, right? It's not designed to prevent. It's not designed to uplift, right? So the question is, could we use $630,000 better in Pasadena or in Chicago or in Portland or Oakland? Absolutely. My argument, and the argument of lots and lots of people who have studied this question, is that you're guaranteed to get much better longer-term public safety results if you spend the extraordinary amount of money that we spend on cops on things that are life-affirming, right? If we spent $630,000, like, I don't know, I'm making this up out of thin air, but maybe you can get 6 full-time teachers or counselors for high school-aged youth in Pasadena. 6. You know how many young people could be affected by just 6 people who dedicate their working days to mentoring and counseling young folks in Pasadena? Do you know how much impact that could do, right? Instead of having 6 cops, right, who don't do that. That's not their job, right? Cops' job is to punish and find and detect and do all these things, or surveil. But like, that money, you can do so much with it, and that's just like 6. Right. You know, instead, what do we get in Pasadena for that money? Do we get deterrence? You know, they say it's deterrence. We're deterring criminality. Are we getting deterrence? Nope. There's no evidence of that. I don't know if there's evidence of deterrence anywhere. No one has ever brought it forward. No one has ever suggested there's empirical evidence that Shotspotter deters crime. That's not true. We're learning today that's not true. Are we getting crime fighting? You know, no, most of the hits are bogus, as we found out. Is there public safety evidence? No, there's really no real evidence, right? Empirical evidence that shows that as systematically that Shotspotter is lowering crime. Even if you think crime is a category worth investigating in the way that traditionally cops tell you it is, even if you think that's true, there's no evidence that it actually lowers crime, right? No one knows. Actually, it's quite the opposite, because most of what happens is that you take resources away from potentially other sort of things that maybe, if you believe in cops, maybe you think cops should be doing, you take them away and you give them to these cops who go in hot in situations where they shouldn't, right? So the short answer to that question from my perspective is that, and from based on the data that we're getting, is no, absolutely not. $630,000 in Pasadena is not worth it. Unsustainable.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that. I think what's another way to think about this too is that it's important to keep in mind that Shotspotter is a product of a company called SoundThinking. This is a business whose model is built around gun violence. They profit off of gun violence. And it's important to think specifically about how they build out their business model. And what they did in Chicago, right, is they came into the city with a very small coverage area for a few $100,000. So 13.5 square miles in 2016, 2017 for a few $100,000. In 2018, the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, signed a contract at that point for 3 years for $33 million. The contract has then since been extended to now be more than $10 million a year. So the city of Chicago has spent more than $44 million, roughly, on ShotSpotter since 2018. And this is the model that the company has. They come in, they enter a city with a smaller coverage area, and then they slowly expand out. They are what is called a SaaS business. They're a subscription or software as a service company. They're a subscription service company. So this is their model. The model is always for growth. So the cost is always going to increase. That is their goal. They don't have any business incentive, truthfully, to actually reduce gun violence because they are collecting data for the police to use. I think in a lot of ways, ShotSpotter is along with these other companies like Flock Safety, license plate readers, other gunshot detection companies, they're data brokers for police. They're not actually designed, they can't make any impact on gun violence or any of the promises they make. They simply collect data, and their goal is to collect as much data as possible to have it as expanded coverage area as possible so that they can increase their profits and their revenues. So I think that's important to keep in mind. I can't say this enough. They're a business. They're on the stock exchange. This is profit for them.
Wow. That's a lot right there. I mean, it's not 630,000 for Pasadena, because if you think about, and sorry to interject, but if you think about every single one of those things that Mohammed said, every one of those things where the officers went there and there was no evidence, right? That was the time that you're paying an officer to go. So if you start adding up the time that you're paying an officer to go, then you're way past 630.
Yeah.
And if you really do the math, you're already in $1 million.
You're a good point.
And growing. Because every time that officer goes, and if it's 1 or 2 officers, then you got to double it again. And so it makes no absolute sense. Whew. With a trend of major cities such as San Antonio, Charlotte, and Atlanta canceling their ShotSpotter contracts, what does the future hold for this technology? Is this something that we're going to see more and more of, like a red light cameras or license plate readers, or do you see this tech fading away? Chicago and Oakland.
I can jump in and say that, in the Chicago experience, like I referenced earlier, this is the heart of the apparatus. The Chicago Police Department has a huge infrastructure for surveillance. And so I don't think gunshot detection technology or any of these other technologies are going to go away anytime soon. The police are, in a moment where they are using these. I think, Jay was speaking to everything over the last few years and sort of the impact of 2020. Technologies like ShotSpotter are positioned as objective. They're machine learning tools. They are intended to be ways that, as ShotSpotter or SoundThinking, the language they use, they talk about precision policing. They're intended to support police departments whose budgets are supposedly being cut. How to do more with less, kind of thing. And I think the other piece of this is to also keep in mind that there is more and more money coming from the federal government that is being sent locally to support contracting not only with ShotSpotter, and I will say that President Biden is on record as being a vocal supporter of ShotSpotter and gunshot detection technology, and so monies are flowing, but also from a lot of funds from the American Rescue Plan are being used across the country to build real-time crime centers, to adopt other technologies. So I think this is something that Pasadena should expect, that, you know, a real-time crime center might be built, a company like Fusus might come in, which is sort of like Amazon Ring, but on steroids. So there are just layers to this to be very aware of in terms of how the money is flowing. I think the thing that may be helpful in terms of additionally thinking about how to combat this is that not only all the stuff that we've said so far, but one of the things that we found in Chicago is that ShotSpotter evidence actually doesn't help in prosecutions. So something that's currently happening right now is that the state's attorney's office in Chicago is dropping charges. They're dropping cases when somebody is, when ShotSpotter evidence is sort of the main evidence, core evidence of their case. So it, you know, it's not working. There's significant funding still going towards it. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind in terms of, I think Mohammed was speaking to it earlier as well, but the money is flowing and there is an effort to try to build out large sort of surveillance apparatuses under the sort of ideas of safety and care. But this is, you know, it's really building out police budgets. But I'm sure Tracy has some good thoughts to add too.
Sure. I mean, I think the common experience of everyone here is that surveillance technology doesn't go away. It gets embedded and it gets bigger. And that's just the way it works. But I would say that I think we will be looking at, I think freestanding gunshot detection software like ShotSpotter is in some trouble. I mean, there's definitely contracts being canceled all over the country, as Florence had mentioned. And we're starting to see some other companies sort of come in with the idea of integrating outdoor gunshot detection microphones in with other technologies. For example, Flock Safety, which is now the biggest automated license plate reader manufacturer in California. They overtook Vigilant Systems, which was part of Motorola, is now piloting or trying out a gunshot detection module that would sort of be a part of their license plate reader cameras. So I think that we'll start to see more and more of these technologies kind of rolled together into kind of complex combinations of technologies. And I think SoundThinking is also heading that way. They've been buying up other companies with the idea of sort of expanding their products. And sometimes we go through a certain amount of rebranding. I'll give an example, which is one of the first predictive policing companies called Predpol, was founded actually in Santa Cruz. They were a California company. And after various things happened with the technology, the company itself basically went kaput, although they're trying to rebrand. But the technology, the thing that they did, predictive policing, that hasn't gone away at all. So whether gunshot detection software will be called ShotSpotter in the future, we don't know, but the technology itself will become a part of other surveillance empires. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I want to add to that, just to that point about Predpol. So ShotSpotter purchased a predictive policing company years ago called HunchLab, and has a predictive policing technology that they describe as patrol management. On ShotSpotter's most recent, or SoundThinking's most recent quarterly earnings call, they actually announced that they purchased more or less the remnants of Predpol.
Oh no.
They purchased their patents. And then they brought in the Predpol Geolitica's engineering team. So they more or less just sort of purchased what is left of the company.
So you see what I said? It's like actually literally happening right in front of your eyes. That's funny. I didn't know that, Ed.
Wow. I know we're getting close on time, but there's one question that I want to kind of jumble around and really talk about, because it's really important to our city, because there is a lot of conversation for the police trying to find their way back into our schools. And there's a lot of gatekeepers saying no. But one of ShotSpotter's biggest selling points is its potential use at schools and universities. How should students respond to this encroaching technology? Anybody?
Can I speak? Excuse me. Can I speak, guys? My name's Cameron McFadden.
No, sorry, that's okay. We're
Sorry.
still doing the presentation. You need to
Yeah.
you need to hang out a little. I'll jump in on the schools question. Once upon a time, ShotSpotter had a list of all their clients on their website. That list has since kind of disappeared because I guess it was a little handy for activists. But a number of those clients were schools and educational districts. So it was really, it was a growth sector for them. And I think that it probably still is for obvious reasons. School shootings are emotional and upsetting. And I think that it's probably very easy to garner a certain amount of, public support for it. But the question is still kind of the same, which is what is really the efficacy of the technology? And how much do we want to turn our schools into heavily policed entities? Like, what impact does that have on learning, and what impact does that have on kids? Which I think it's increasingly being shown that heavily policed schools don't have happy student populations and don't have great test scores, right? So I think the fact that this kind of software is actively trying to sell itself to school districts is an area of concern.
I would just also add that SoundThinking just purchased a company recently called SafePoint, who sells video surveillance technology that is intended to detect guns and other weapons going into schools, hospitals, other public agencies, as well as businesses, corporations. So this is a business model for them. Again, this is a business. So this is a new technology, a new product that they have, and they're going to be doubling down and additionally focusing on this moving forward because they just added another product to sell to these institutions.
Well, I guess the pace of all these acquisitions, because they seem to be happening at a blindingly fast pace, just show how much profit margin there is in spotting gunfire.
Notwithstanding the apparently terrible performance of its NASDAQ listed stock, which is not doing very well. So take anything out of this, don't invest in SoundThinking. It's a bad investment.
Yeah, because I'm buying things right and left. Amazing.
One more thing I'll say is I think I'm sort of reiterating the point I made earlier about like how are we really spending our resources? Like in Portland, many of the public schools in Portland still have lead pipes, and the water that goes through that pipes is many times what is considered the safe amount, like in terms of how bad it is, and they still haven't replaced those pipes. And there's a long history of evidence to connect the contamination of lead and violent crime. And so, it really shows what the priorities are. Do we stop crime? Do we stop violence before it starts by fixing the pipes? Like that's a pretty, I would say uncontroversial thing. You want to have an easy political win, like get the pipes fixed, replace the lead pipes so children can drink water from the fountain and not be poisoned. But instead, we're presented this option as this is the only option. Like it's a false dichotomy is what I would tell parents. And I would also tell them that, and this is something I said to the mayor to his face, Ted Wheeler, who he's a character. And I told him to his face, because he said at a council meeting that, well, he thinks that we should bring a mother that lost, their child to gun violence up here and see what they have to say. And I was like, how dare you even hypothetically exploit the grief of a mother for a political purpose, to line the pockets of a private corporation and of the police force, which is getting more money than they've ever gotten in their entire life. And, that's what SoundThinking, ShotSpotter, these police departments are doing with parents in schools, is they're trying to basically like give them this false dichotomy, either your child's safety or Shotspotter. And it's a false dichotomy. And in fact, it's an antithetical situation where the more money that you're putting in Shotspotter, the more resources you're taking away from the things that actually keep children safe. So, you know, I would say don't fall for, you know, the hype. Don't fall for the bait and switch, because it's nonsense. Like if you look at the data, it's absolute nonsense, and it's a false dichotomy.
What actions, because I kind of want to end before we go into our like 15 minutes of extra time, what actions can citizens take to be more involved in the deployment and use of Shotspotter in their communities or eliminating its use? Pasadena, then everybody.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like maybe Flo, I'd kick this question back to you. Yeah, I'm not an organizer. I do a little bit, but I'm not much of an organizer. I'm curious what some of the organizers think about that. So maybe Flo, you can take that.
No.
or not to put you on the spot, but yeah.
No, I feel that it is spaces like this. At the end of the day, people don't know what they don't know, and at the end of, when there's only one narrative, just like was presented by the PD, then that narrative is the one that gets pushed out into our media. And unless we can have other narratives and other information and other places in social media where we can tell our story, that's where people start to wake up and say, oh, okay, I just didn't know. And then when you ask for a call of action, then people will respond. But I feel like it's more spaces like this and collecting more data and more information that it can be pushed out to our community that can make people be very much aware. Because at the end of the day, this is what is the funny thing about Pasadena. It may be in districts 1, 3, and 5, right? Because they didn't want to put it into 7, 2, 6, and 4. But best believe if it was in any of those other districts and it went wrong, all hell would break loose.
Yeah.
And you don't want to wish that on nobody, but all hell would break loose. Everybody would backtrack if it happened in District 2, if it happened near the Rose Bowl, if it happened anywhere else. And so I think that's another place for our organizers is to say that what happens when it's a call goes out and it's a young teenage white boy, a young teenage white girl. What's going to happen when it's an Asian? What's going to happen when it's on the other side of town where it was not meant to happen? Or behold, that child or that person was on Northwest side and it happened and they got caught in a clash. That to me is the different narrative outside of you're always going to be attacking black and brown, because that's what they do. We now have a street crime or gang unit. So add that on top of it. But that's my piece. You guys know your cities.
Yeah, I mean, in one way or the other, and it doesn't have to be a privacy commission or a police commission. There are all kinds of models for this, but we emphasize community choice, community consent, and the idea that the police have to ask us if we want this. Because that process doesn't really exist unless you make it exist, right? In some way or the other. Now, of course, without information, without workshops like this, like we're doing, without statistics, without reporting, people are going to consent because they're not going to have enough information to do anything else. So it's it's a dual process. There has to be dialogue, there has to be information, but in the end, it should be a choice. And if the community is what's being watched, then the community gets to say yes or no. And I don't know why that's controversial. It seems to be. Ever since I started saying it, people have been treating me like I'm a lunatic. But the reality is the community has to consent to surveillance. And in whatever way we can make that a reality, that's sort of the activist challenge around all this stuff. I mean, unfortunately, that probably doesn't mean that all surveillance will be gone. but at least a community gets to pick and choose what we can live with and what we can't live with, and where we want to set that balance between security and freedom. Right? Because it's a balance. It's never going to be 0-10. But whether it's 2 or 3 or 7 or 8 is something that we should be able to decide as a community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to jump off of that, one thing that we pressed really heavy on in Portland is the of course I blanked out of the word, but the procurement process, where they didn't want to go through one. They were like, literally, they told us this is happening, we're doing this, and then we were like, well, isn't there supposed to be a procurement process? Or so being able to like lean on the city's own policies and be like, wait a minute, you said that this is how things are done, and you're not even doing it by your own standards. And so that gave us more time to think about like what we're gonna do. We also contacted like the city auditor, and like, I mean, the whole reason even why basically the FitCog, they came back from a Tampa resort vacation and suddenly were like, Shotspotter. Come to find out, Shotspotter was a huge presence at that vacation. As far as I'm concerned, that's lobbying, I mean, very clearly. And so we filed a complaint with the auditor. And of course, they sided with the police and ShotSpotter and said it wasn't lobbying. But it gave us more time, and it created more buzz that actually the newspapers were willing to pick up, because just telling them that this is bad technology, they're like, whatever. But you're like, oh, the auditor's doing a report, or like, oh, like the city is backtracking because it has to do a procurement process due to community complaints. Like, that's a news story that people can actually latch onto, and we were able to like create media buzz around that. And the final thing I'll say is like, yeah, just come into these like oversight meetings and stuff like that. Like, it is so absolutely boring. And like the first oversight meetings I went to, teach their own, but because I could see it was a place where they were overly comfortable, I just shut up and let them talk. I took screenshots of, of their faces, rolling their eyes when community members were telling their stories. I have videos of them making fun of neighborhoods that they were supposed to be policing, like all sorts of things, because they are absolutely comfortable and nobody was coming to these meetings. Like, literally, I would just show up there and like smile with my camera on and like ask them softball questions and start taking notes. And then, after a few meetings, they started noticing things in the press and they started noticing pushback. And then they figured out it was me, and they were like, and then all of a sudden, all the permissions on the Zooms changed. Nobody could chat anymore. Nobody could see videos. Like, all this changed. All their Zoom videos suddenly magically disappeared. There was some glitch that happened, and all the recorded videos of the meetings were gone, and still gone to this day. Like, and so a lot of times when they're comfortable, they are their own worst enemy, because they're willing to say things that they say to each other all the time that the common person, the general public, would find absolutely like aghast. But this is how they talk on a regular basis to each other. So sometimes just being in a space to listen to them gives you ammunition to like fuel your like campaigns and stuff like that.
Thank you all so very much. Just as we're getting kind of ready to wrap up and close, just want to hear some closing thoughts from each one of you. As either what does the future hold, or what do you see your stake in the future? As you said, ShotSpotter is obviously a bigger umbrella. I can say in Pasadena, it's being able to put forward recommendations and policies for it, while still trying to get rid of it. But yeah, what are your thoughts moving forward, everyone? Oakland.
Oh, sure. Well, I think, the message that we wanted to sort of, end on is kind of what I already said, which is that it's about the community reclaiming the power to kind of choose and to make decisions about sort of what is okay and what's not okay. And unfortunately, that's power that we have to take. No one's going to just hand it to us. So I think that's the organizing challenge. In terms of going forward, I mean, there's no doubt that surveillance is going to continue, it's going to grow, it's going to expand, it's going to morph. And I think in the short term, we should certainly expect that to continue. My hope is that those of us who are watching, and those of us who are engaging, and those of us who are trying to sort of create that consensus that this is a two-way process, not a one-way process, are also growing. And so it's not going to be the kind of free ride that it certainly, you know, has been over the past 10 years. I also think for a while there, you know, technology made such leaps and bounds that it kind of jumped over a lot of civil society's kinds of safeguards. I think that we're now sort of, you know, coming to terms with the ways in which technology has changed the society, and are more comfortable with that kind of pace and that kind of expansion, and, you know, really, really, really aware that it jumps the shark if we don't keep a real close eye on it. So I guess in terms of how optimistic I can get, I would say that it's going to be an ongoing struggle or tension, but I think that we do have some power on both sides, and we just have to, you know, build up what I would call the, you know, the alternate power, which is the power of checks and balances and the power of consent and choice. So it's not just a declaration from on high about what kind of surveillance is going to impact us.
Thank you. Chicago?
That's about all I got.
Sure. I guess the couple things I would say, one, you know, I think, you know, or we can win when we're organized and when we build power. Just last week, Chicago canceled its gang database after 6 years of organizing against it. So we can do this if we organize. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, like I said earlier, surveillance isn't safety. I think we shouldn't fall for that, and we should be really intentional about how we think about how we're building safety and defining safety in our communities. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, this is a company, these are companies, and we should really be questioning what role private companies, you know, what role does the marketplace have in delivering public safety? I don't think they should have any role. It's not clear that their interests align with our interests in terms of creating safe communities. So I think we should be really diligent about trying to address the power dynamic that comes when a corporation is able to work with the police. So we need to be able to start to intervene and separate that relationship and hold both of them accountable.
Thank you. Portland?
I think one takeaway I have is that of just the importance of building kind of like a multi-sector kind of approach. We reached out to all sorts of people. You know, I'm an abolitionist. Not everybody that we partnered with was an abolitionist. In fact, I would say our strongest ally was another police community oversight group, and their purpose pretty much is to like improve relationships with the police, which is not a value that I have at all, and not something that that's not something that's important to me, and that's not something I necessarily align with. But they were very much against Shotspotter. And, you know, we approached them, we talked to them, and they're like, "This doesn't sound good. This isn't going to improve, you know, police community relationships. This is going to make things worse." And they were a huge factor in getting public support, you know, this kind of like legitimized body. And they had this community town hall that had like 200 or 300 people on it. And pretty much every single person in the chat was against Shotspotter. And so it was kind of a turning point. And not just, you know, this oversight group, which I would say is more liberal than abolitionists, but also tech people. We brought tech people into, you know, some of these meetings. And as they're trying to like, you know, have this opinion that, oh, the technology will be amazing. We had tech people there that were like, I can explain to you exactly why this is not going to be amazing. And, you know, to be honest, a lot of people in those oversight groups and the police are like, you know, boomers that are not technologists. Like they don't actually understand the technology. So, you know, to have people that understand the technology that are like, no, this is not good. to talk to the people that don't understand the technology, that are trying to sell the technology to other people that don't understand the technology. That's really valuable. So, you know, all of this is to say, like, having lots of different types of people, and, you know, we're maybe not aligned on everything, but we're aligned on that one thing, that's Shotspotter, and that's enough for this campaign specifically. You know, when it comes to other things, you know, we're not necessarily going to work together, or we're going to have to work something out. But when it comes to Shotspotter, we're all 100% on the same page. We don't want it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mohammed?
Don't want to add too much to that. I think that to me is super empowering, actually, both the bit about like gang databases in Chicago, this idea about intersectionality and sort of big tent coalitions in Portland. So I think we can do it. That's about all I'll say. I will also thank everyone and the panelists. I have to run out for some childcare duties, but this has been a lovely space, and looking forward to additional conversations, both with the local folks here in Pasadena, but also with the folks from across the country. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you all. I know you're all in different time zones, and I appreciate you. And I'm gonna keep myself at your feet, because got to keep learning, because I can see it's going to be a long journey. So thank you all.